The interesting narrative of Olaudah Equiano is going to continue. I'm going to start around line 295. This is part 3. This wretched situation was again aggravated by the galling of the chains, now became insupportable, and the filth of the necessary tubs, into which the children often fell and were almost suffocated. Necessary tubs would be containers in which people would go to the bathroom. The shrieks of the women and the groans of the dying rendered the whole scene of horror almost inconceivable. Happily, perhaps for myself, I was soon reduced so low here that it was thought necessary to keep me almost always on deck, and from my extreme youth I was not put into feathers. In this situation I expected every hour to share the fate of my companions, some of whom were almost daily brought upon the deck at the point of death, which I had begun to hope would soon put an end to my miseries. So things are so horrific, he wishes to die. Often did I think many of the inhabitants of the deep much more happy than myself. So he's saying anyone who dies gets thrown overboard, and he's thinking that those dead bodies, those persons who have died in the slavery on the ship, were in a better situation than he was. I envied them the freedom they enjoyed, and often wished I could change my condition for theirs. Every circumstance I met with served only to render my state more painful and heighten my apprehensions and my opinion of the cruelty of whites. One day they had taken a number of fishes, and when they had killed and satisfied themselves with as many as they thought fit, to our astonishment, who were on the deck, rather than give any of them to us to eat, as we expected, they tossed the remaining fish into the sea again, although we begged and prayed for some as well as we could, but in vain. And some of my countrymen, being pressed by hunger, took an opportunity when they thought no one saw them of trying to get a little privately. But they were discovered, and the attempt procured them some very severe floggings. So in other words, when the white sailors fished and they brought fish on board to eat, they ate their fill, and instead of feeding the people who were starving in their care, they threw the fish overboard. And some people did try to sneak a portion of fish, and they ended up being flogged. One day, when we had a smooth sea and moderate wind, 2 of my wearied countrymen who were chained together, I was near them at the time, preferring death to such a life of misery, somehow made through the netting and jumped into the sea. Immediately another quite dejected fellow, who on account of his illness was suffered to be out of irons, was soon also followed their example, and I believe many more would very soon have done the same if they had not been prevented by the ship's crew, who were instantly alarmed. Those of us that were the most active were in a moment put down under the deck, and there was such a noise and confusion amongst the people of the ship as I had never heard before, to stop her and get the boat out to go after the slaves. However, 2 of the wretches were drowned, but they got the other and afterward flogged him unmercifully for thus attempting to prefer death to slavery. In this manner we continue to undergo more hardships than I can now relate, hardships which are inseparable from this accursed trade. Many a time we were near suffocation from the want of fresh air, which we were often without for whole days together. This and the stench of the necessary tubs carried off many. During our passage, I first saw flying fish, which surprised me very much. They used frequently to fly across the ship, and many of them fell on the deck. I also now first saw the use of the quadrant. I had often, with astonishment, seen the mariners make observations with it. I could not think what it meant, and they at last took notice of my surprise, and one of them, willing to increase it as well as to gratify my curiosity, made me one day look through it. The clouds appeared to me to be land, which disappeared as they passed along. This heightened my wonder, and I was now more persuaded than ever that I was in another world, and that everything around me was magic. At last we came in sight of the island of Barbados. at which the whites on board gave a great shout and made many signs of joy to us. We did not know what to think of this, but as the vessel drew nearer, we plainly saw the harbor and other ships of different kinds and sizes, and we soon anchored amongst them off of Bridgetown. Many merchants and planters now came on board, though it was in the evening. They put us in separate parcels and examined us attentively. They also made us jump and pointed to the land, signifying we were to go there. We thought by this we should be eaten by these ugly men, as they appeared to us, and would when soon after we were all put down under the deck again. There was much dread and trembling amongst us, and nothing but bitter cries to be heard all the night from these apprehensions, insomuch that at last the white people got some old slaves from the land to pacify us. They told us we were not to be eaten, but to work, and were soon to go on land, which we should see many of our country people. This report eased us much, and sure enough, soon after we were landed, there came to us Africans of all languages. So they get to the island of Barbados, and they're examined by white men who came from the island, and the slaves were all afraid that they were going to be eaten by these monsters. So there was such a clamoring, such an outcry amongst the slaves that the slave owners brought on board older slaves who had been working on the islands, who said, no, you're going to be taken off the ship and you're going to work on land. We were conducted immediately to the merchant's yard, where we were all pent up together like so many sheep in a fold, without regards to sex or age. As every object was new to me, everything I saw filled me with surprise. What struck me first was that the houses were built with stories, and in every other respect different from those in Africa. But I was still more astonished on seeing people on horseback. I did not know what this could mean, and indeed I thought these people were full of nothing but magical arts. While I was in this astonishment, one of my fellow prisoners spoke to a countryman of his about the horses, who said that they were the same kind they had in their country. I understood them, though they were from a distant part of Africa, and I thought it odd that I had not seen any horses there. But afterwards, when I came to converse with different Africans, I found they had many horses amongst them, and much larger than those I then saw. We were not many days in the merchant's custody before we were sold after the usual manner, which is this. On a signal given, at the beat of a drum, the buyers rush at once into the yard where the slaves are confined and make a choice of that parcel that they like best. The noise and clamor with which this is attended, and the eagerness visible in the countenances of the buyers, serve not a little to increase the apprehensions of the terrified Africans, who may well be supposed to consider themselves as the ministers of the destruction to which they think themselves devoted. So think about this. You know, they're taken off board and they're put in parcels. That means they're grouped together. And when it comes to be the day where they're sold, there's such a noise and clamor. The white slave owners come in and they are buying, and it's an auction. So you know what an auction is like. So these parcels of slaves are being auctioned off to the highest bidder. So in this manner, without scruple, our relations and friends separated, most of them never to see each other again. I remember in the vessel in which I was brought over in the men's apartment, there were several brothers who, in the sale, were sold in different lots, and it was very moving on this occasion to see and hear their cries of parting. O ye nominal Christians! Might not an African ask you, learned you this from your God, who says unto you, do unto all men as you would men should do unto you? Is it not enough that we are torn from our country and friends to toil for your luxury and lust of gain? Must every tender feeling be likewise sacrificed to your avarice? Are the dearest friends and relations, now rendered more dear by their separation from their kindred, still to be parted from each other and thus prevented from cheering the gloom of slavery with the small comfort of being together and mingling their suffering and sorrows? Why are parents to lose their children, brothers, their sisters, or husbands, their wives? Surely this is a new refinement in cruelty, which, while it has no advantage to atone for it, thus aggravates distress and adds fresh sorrows even to the wretchedness of slavery. So in this passage, he is saying, these white folks are Christians, and he is saying to you Christians, is this what you learned from your God who said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you? Isn't it not enough that we are torn from our country and friends to work for your luxury and your greed? Must you also damage every other tender feeling that we might have? You are separating friends, you're separating family, you're separating parents from children. For what? Parents must lose their children, brothers or sisters, husbands or wives. Surely this is a new height in your cruelty, which has no advantage to it, and thus increases the distress and adds fresh horrors, even in the wretchedness of slavery. So by dividing up families and friends and countrymen, mothers from children, husbands from wives, the cruelty of these Christians is just beyond what can be expressed by Olaudah. This is just something that he has never quite figured it out, because it's contrary to the Christian teachings of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So we have read this, and I hope you enjoyed the readings, and you're going to need to go back and find various answers, but I'll go over the next assignment at a later point. Thank you.